Hi, everybody. This is my final project lesson for exploring literature. Uh, for today, my critical lens is historicism, and I will use this lens to compare a short story to a short story that is from the 1920s. Even though this is written in the 1920s and historicism first started in the 1980s, we're still going to have the similar concepts in what it is. So, first of all, what is new historicism? New historicism is basically allow readers to have a closer look at context of a literature work in order to have a better understanding of the significance of that work. It's basically an idea that literary works are intertwined with politics, social, and historical announcements, of course, it's time. So for the story, I'm going to compare it, even though, New Historicism is from the 1980s, I'm going to compare it to short stories in the 1920s. Okay? I will post a copy of these PowerPoints at Blackboard, just a reference so you can follow along as I compare New Historicism to the short story. So basically, New Historicism or literary works are influenced by the context. So basically, this critical lens is based about the context of that literary work. Also, it helps interpret in terms of power, language, the patriarchal societies that is being compared, and what is the mindset of colonialism. So in this short story that I'll mention, it's basically about the European empires and it conquered them throughout the world in the 1890s through the 1920s, essentially. The most famous people that of this critical lens is Green, Stephen Greenblatt, who is also known as the father of New Historicism. He's the guy who created this. He's basically taking old concepts and making new. As I mentioned before in the first slide, it was basically the definition of what he came up and what is new historicism is. The other person is Jacques Derrida, and he believed that new historicism is thrice processed. Essentially, is one, the ideologically or the outlook of historical context when you look at literature work. Or number two, you also look at the current context of the literary work. And number three, you focused on the distorted results from the complex nature of the language. So in the short story that we're trying to tie to I have is basically what the process is when you look at the literary work and the new historical system lands. So the source story I will have today I will mention is called Introduction to the Trenches. So basically this is written by Richard Alderton. He is a World War One veteran, and so he writes. It is part of a collection of books, three-part series books. Short story is basically based on the book Death of a Hero. Richard Alderton, he's also I highly one of the greatest authors in the 20th century. In fact, this book, Death of a Hero, is listed as one of the greatest English writings in the 20th century up to that point. And so the setting of Introduction to the Trenches is based on the Battle of Somme. If you don't know history, it happened in 1916. It's considered one of the bloodiest battles of the war. In fact, one of the bloodiest battles of British history besides the Battle of Verdun, which is considered the bloodiest battle in World War One. The Battle of Somme is kind of one of the highest. On the first day, almost 100,000 men were dead. I mean, it's astonishing. And so Richard Alton, in this short story, he tells about the first experiences of going into the trenches and the first taste of action when he was in the trenches. Basically, of the entire series of the books, not just specifically this short story, is basically Alton telling society that World War One guys are basically forgotten, pushed off to the side, and that society has now recognized these men who fought for their country, and that they need to be taken care of in society. In the Scarlet article, The Censored Language of War, Richard Alton's Death of a Hero, and three other novels in 1929. It was written by Jarius Willis. He kind of take not just Richard Alton's work, but other works of World War One veterans. And he kind of makes like a conclusion on an investigation of these works, why they're written, and he went down to the point of what it is and what the problem is and what was kind of like the moral lessons of these books or those written. He's done his research. Um, ba- Basically, Richard Alden's publisher is American publisher, so this is not a European or specifically British publisher named Kavichy Fried. Basically, he and they and a bunch of other publishers basically try to scam these writers of their money. Basically, what happened is they create this list called purple words, and basically is a list of words that's considered taboo to the English writers and should be forbidden in these books that these World War One veterans or those World War One era writers write in their books. So it's considered like censored. And basically for this American publisher, he's kind of saying, hey, look, people don't really understand. It's kind of inappropriate for young readers, which I kind of understand, but like people don't really understand the primary. And he's kind of like scamming Richard Olington out of his money with the too good to be true deals. Uh, Basically, his offer to Olington is £100 advance. Remember, the British currency is pounds compared to the United States, which is the US dollar. In exchange for 15% royalties that Olington made. So this is kind of like a big old scam, a big old good to be true deal. And what Arlington did, for him to kind of, censor his words, he put asterisks to words that he replaced, signaling, hey, look, this is kind of inappropriate. This is kind of like an inappropriate word that I originally had, so I put it with a different word. And he Alton believed that these words are silly and don't people really understand. But other writers suggest no, people will understand that what you're saying. And so Alton had to fight for his words in order to come up what he's saying in his experience. So how does this tie to new historicalism? Well, if you look at what the three process as mentioned what was it? By these by Derrida, Jacques Derrida. If we look at the process that he mentioned, uh, if we look at closely by the process that Derrida mentioned, we came with the conclusion that it is from World War One. Okay, so during World War One, it is considered one of the bloodiest conflicts in our world history, and essentially I'm sorry. Sorry. Here it is. Essentially, this war was caused by nationalism, imperialism, which is said so previously leading up to these actions and beliefs in the European power of imperialism, nationalism throughout the late 1800s kind of fueled this fire. And what really made this World War started is the assassination of Archduke really just sets it up. Okay. And majority of war was a stalemate and millions have died fighting for political interests. Not just freedom or liberty, but really political interests of politicians, monarchs, and these huge elite generals who just sits back and just command from a piece of paper, compared to these bands who every day suffer the pains, death, the stench of trenches, and find just one set of manners. Or square meters, what I was meant to say. I mean, this war was a stalemate until 1917 when the Americans came in and changed the tide of the war, and of course it was an Allied victory in exchange. We also got the purple words, and this came the purple words that mentioned by publishers who basically scam these artists, artists of saying taboo, not saying taboo stuff or taboo words that could like offend the audience or we don't understand and stuff. And it's and kind of mentioned how Richard Arlington fighting for his words and is saying in his books. I mean, and I mean, this guy, literally had to fight for what he has to say in his books. I mean, but in the end, people really understand what he's saying because you probably know somebody who fought in the war or they've been in the war itself, so you kind of understand what he's saying. And lastly, if you look at today, you have the media, particularly biased media, no matter which side of the spectrum you're on, and their censorship on important information for the public to read. And specifically, they censor words and nitpick stuff, for them to get their audience on their political or social beliefs and try to also push their agenda of what they're saying. Okay, I mean, in the end, in a nutshell, what happened back then is the same thing today. We got the media nitpicking of stuff or the political agenda. Same thing with back then. Back then, when Richard Arlington wrote his book over World War One and his experience in the First World War, really changed everything. Uh, Thank you for listening to my presentation. Have a good day.